Welcome to this edition of Great Books, a lively discussion of a selection from the canon of exceptional literature. Here's your host, Jack Hatfield.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us for the Great Books Show. I'm Jack Hatfield. Our panel meets regularly to discuss important works of classic and modern literature. Today we're discussing On Tragedy, taken from Aristotle's The Poetics. For an overview of Aristotle's life, I turn to Joe.
Aristotle was born in Stygiris, a Greek colony in Macedonia, in 384 BC. At 17, he entered Plato's Academy in Athens, where he studied and lectured for 20 years. Aristotle's treatises were most likely presented first as lectures for his students. Tonight's selection, On Tragedy, is taken from his seminal treatise on literary criticism, The Poetics. In it, among other things, Aristotle defines tragedy and describes its effect on the emotions of pity and fear, delineates the 6 constituent elements of this dramatic form, discusses points of plot and character, and describes the fall of the hero's fortunes from good to bad as a result of hamartia, a tragic character flaw. To begin our discussion, I yield the floor to Jack.
Thanks, Joe. Maybe the first question we should ask, since it's on tragedy, is what's the purpose of tragedy according to Aristotle? Anyone want to take a shot at that one?
See Jake smirking. He must want to.
I could say one word, catharsis.
Okay.
Purification, purgation, or outlook, change of outlook.
From what?
From whatever you started in relation to fear and trembling.
Okay. Somebody else? Joe?
You know, I never, I never really did have that clear in my mind. I mean, Aristotle talks about the effect of tragedy is to arouse feelings of pity and fear that then something happens to it. They get purged, they get purified, whatever happens. But I was never sure if that was basically it. I mean, that is the function of tragedy. That's the end of it, or whether that was a means to some other kind of end. That I was never sure.
I'm with the means to a different kind of end. But there's no real evidence in the text. Maybe it's in an excerpt that's not included. But I thought that there was some kind of edification that you would get from tragedy, because he excludes things that he finds that aren't edifying, that it must be from life. There shouldn't be literally a deus ex machina. It should be reasonable. They should be well-known issues and well-known families. And so you can take education from this somehow.
Well, when I
Improve your judgment.
Yeah.
Improve your judgment.
When I read this, I was thinking just pity and fear. I mean, that seems pretty limiting, because when I have seen tragedy, sorrow and sometimes you go, what's the word that Schadenfreude? No, that I'm saying.
Schadenfreude.
Yeah, right. That I'm
Glad it's not me.
Yeah, glad it's not me, or that fool. So.
Well, that is part of it, I think.
But pity and fear, it seems to me, much more restrictive.
It could be sorrow. It could be other.
Well, yeah,
emotions.
right. Yeah.
Well, he defines pity and fear, doesn't he?
Yes.
Undeserved misfortune is one of them for pity, I think, and for
He said
misfortunes that might happen to us. So that's would speak to his point that it's supposed to be edifying.
Well, fear is that you recognize the similarity between you and the person.
Could happen to me,
and the tragedy, yes.
There, but for the grace of the gods.
Right.
Yeah, right, exactly. But he also distinguishes other things. He also talks about other things. He talks about just human feeling, which sounds like a sort of a generalized compassion, but he doesn't. And at the suffering, just seeing the suffering of others. But that's not good enough. I mean, that's not arousing. That really isn't the point of well-done tragedies, well-constructed tragedies.
The type of person that he thinks it should be about, at the bottom of page 235, about 2/3 of the way down, he saes, there remains then the intermediate sort of person, one who is not preeminently virtuous and just, one who incurs misfortune not as a result of vice or depravity, but some sort of error of judgment while enjoying great reputation and prosperity. So this is your typical Joe that something happens to, and you can learn how he reacts and empathize.
And learn.
And learn.
But it seems to me
He doesn't like that one. Excuse me.
that tragedy also happens to people through no fault of their own.
Right.
And so, and he doesn't call that tragedy, right? He's saying you must have a tragic flaw.
Tragic flaw is a part of it, and it is that type of person because it's some error of judgment while enjoying great reputation and prosperity. So you make some understandable move that was dumb.
Yeah,
but you're
like
basically
throwing
a
that
good
pass
person.
on the goal line yesterday. that was definitely
That was tragic.
That was a grave mistake.
That's a tragic flaw right there.
I'm just thinking of some other cases of in Shakespeare where some innocent just gets it. You know, Cordelia is a good example, and
Desdemona.
yeah, right, and that certainly doesn't fit his.
It does. It does because I think Othello, or what's the other protagonist's name?
You mean Iago?
Iago.
Yeah, Iago's the bad guy. So
Right.
Othello's a good guy,
Right.
and he has a tragic flaw because
Sure,
he's
but
so
we're just-
credulous.
sure, but we're
and
just
he's
talking
just an
about
average
Cordelia.
Joe.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, we better stay out of Shakespeare, although he's a good one.
Yeah, there's something on 238 that's saying that all the characters should be good.
Yep.
What do you make of that? I didn't understand that, the point he was making. They all should be good. Good in which way?
Well, he doesn't say.
Well, they're
Where is that,
heroes.
Jack?
He would think
It's,
virtue, wouldn't you think?
Oh,
The last
I see it.
paragraph.
All the paragraph.
He would mean virtue. A person's a better than average man. That's what a tragedy is. Imitation of persons better than the average man.
Right.
You would admire them. They have some kind of virtues you'd admire, but nonetheless they have a flaw too that allows this difficulty that turns their life around.
Yeah, I think all these little clues that he gives about, what constitutes the elements of tragedy is verisimilitude. That the guy should be good, he should be average, there shouldn't be anything extraordinary about it. The plot should be reasonable because he's teaching. This verisimilitude is very important to him, I think.
Well, yeah, the imitation part is it's supposed to help you judge, form decent opinions and not go too far. Like that's what happens to some people. They go too far and then they pay the price.
There's maybe more directly to your question. I mean, he does say that a change of fortune has to be a part of tragedy. So if the characters aren't good to start out with, then the change of fortune is pointless,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
It doesn't teach anything. Well, it sort of does. You could say it's poetic justice or something, but
He says something about something being the most untragic thing possible. Something when a bad man goes.
Yeah, you wouldn't care if it wasn't a good person.
That's right.
Yeah, right. So,
But also in terms of the issue of the function, what's tragedy for? On page 237, he says, since the poet has to employ imitation in order to produce the pleasure arising from pity and fear. Maybe that's it. Maybe that he feels. Maybe at some level he thinks that the experiencing of pity and fear and whatever happens to that purgation, purification, whatever happens to that in itself is pleasant. And maybe that's all it is.
Catharsis
Maybe
that
that's
you're
all,
talking about.
maybe that's all it is. There's just a pleasure that comes from experiencing pity and fear.
pleasure in a different sense. I mean, more like enjoyment in a deeper sense.
Right.
Understanding and that kind of a pleasure that comes from
because
understanding.
catharsis a lot of times does not immediately produce pleasure at all.
Right.
But not in a
painful.
thin sense that we
Right.
sometimes think
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
On page 232, he says that speaking to your point, earlier, David, he said you have to have known people. But then he says, toward the bottom, he says, there are others which have no known names at all. For example, Agathons and Theus. Here, both names and incidents are of the poet's invention, but the play is no less delightful on that account. So here's another thing. It's a tragedy is delightful in some way. You get pleasure from pity and fear. Maybe that's part of what tragedy is about. You go for a certain kind of pleasure from comedy. You go for another kind of pleasure from tragedy. But it's a pleasure.
You know, he says tragedy is deeper. You know, and he makes that contrast between history and the philosophical part of it, the more universal, the poets or philosophers.
Right.
You know, I think you're right, because kind of the modern day tragedy could very well be horror movies. And
Yes.
people flock to horror movies. I used to go to them. And you go, why? You know?
Yeah, right, yes.
There's a certain
Exactly.
amount of pleasure there.
Exactly.
To get rid of the things that are under your bed when you're a little kid. That's why you go.
But do you think that's what Aristotle's after? That's
No.
the kind of pleasure that you get from the pain or suffering of the
He's after
characters
better
of tragedy?
people.
Yeah.
He wants you to be heroes in the best sense. You think of the golden mean, maybe, although I don't see it mentioned here, but it's when you overstep that you get in trouble. Good people with defects of character.
Mm-hmm.
And he says they got to flow from the structure of the thing and be probable, if not necessary, at least. And it's the whole business. He's trying to portray the process of life, of living, and being a good judge of it as you go along the way, not getting carried away and not making mistakes or whatever words we want to use.
Mm-hmm.
That goes along with his point about the difference between poetry and history.
Yeah,
because history's there,
It's
and it's not.
232.
It didn't transpire to be edifying. It just happened. But the poet can craft something in the general case to make it more applicable to the human condition.
Yeah, here's what he says on 232 to that. Poetry is more philosophic and of greater significance in history, for its statements are the nature rather of universals, whereas those of history are particulars.
So the edification is in the lifelikeness.
Mm-hmm.
I think that people can understand and take with them and say, that could have been me. Look
Absolutely.
what happened to him.
Absolutely.
Do you think,
Because he says it's not demonstrative. You cannot demonstrate what's going to happen in an action.
I think you're kind of saying this, but let me ask you a question. Do you think this, he seems to be talking just about tragedy as in a play or an art. Is he also bringing in tragedy in human lives? I mean, is that part of what he's addressing here?
Well, he says tragedy, it's not about persons, but about an action in life. Somewhere there's a statement in here, I can't tell you where it is, but he says it's not about persons, a tragedy, but it's about action and life.
Right.
That's what he's trying, it's an imitation of an action in life, not of persons.
So
it's not tied to a specific person. So it's,
That's right.
So it's generalizable.
Yeah, he's not psychologizing things. He wants us to look at the process, what's going on outside of us. And everybody that watches it goes through this experience and forms their own character as a result of doing it.
which is psychology.
Well, he doesn't think so, though.
Well, does he?
He says that the characters, meaning the characters, not meaning the dramatis personae. I mean, not the actual people on the stage, but the character of the people within.
Yeah, the plot is the critical thing.
Is for the sake of the plot. The characters are for the sake of the plot. The plot is not for the sake of the characters. So, and he said that there are some plays that have no characters, which doesn't mean that there are not people standing on the stage. They just don't reveal the inner character. The actions don't reveal the inner character of the person.
No, that all happens to the people that are sitting there as audience. They're the ones that get changed in their various ways.
Right.
You know.
I don't know, Jack. I never got I see your point, but I never got that from the text, that he was sort of extending it out.
But we're talking kind of
sort of now,
I think though that it can't be extended out into life's instances, because the whole point of the tragedy is that the shape of it is in the hands of the poet. And life doesn't intrude beyond the dimensions imagined by the poet, whereas in life, it just happens. And he's dealing with a more controlled environment to make his point, I think, so that he couldn't extrapolate that to, well, he could extrapolate to individual instances of situations, but I don't think the general case only is applicable to the general cases that he chooses to represent.
Well,
Yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, he's trying to extract the essence of tragedy from a very specific form of tragedy, which is Athenian tragedy, which was, all the stuff that we know about it, and it was, yeah, right, exactly, and the semi-quasi-religious origins and all that kind of stuff. So he's got this body of data that he's working from, and he's trying to extract from it these principles. Of course, our experiences are far larger than that, and so it's. One way I tried to think about this in terms of what the function of tragedy is, and which is keep coming back to that, because I think what we're talking about are related to it in some ways, was what would he have expected to have changed, if anything, in the spectators after they left the theater?
Right.
What would be different in the people who actually saw Oedipus for the first time? Anything? I mean, would he expect them to be any different? Would he expect them just to have had a good time, essentially? And the pleasures of fear and pity.
Well, if the spectacle isn't important,
the spectacle isn't that important, right?
and the plot is important, or of primary importance, then there must be some meaning in the outcome that he wants us to take back.
You think so?
I think it'd be very good. He says he wants tragedy should overcome fear and pity. And I think that's what he's saying, that people walking out of that would have a different relationship to fear and pity.
Well, not
So
necessarily
almost like a
overcome it.
therapeutic kind of
Yes,
thing.
very much so. Yeah.
I don't think it's just that. I don't think it's not not overcome it, because you're going to live with it all your life. I mean, you need that. That's part of the life process.
Having pity and fear.
Yes.
And each time you overcome it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Or try to overcome
Right,
it,
yeah,
or
try to.
transform your understanding of
Yeah.
it. Here's what listen to this. Tragedy is an imitation, not of, page 228, an imitation not of persons, but of action and life, of happiness and misery. It's sort of out there. It's an objective thing, and you're all gathered around witnessing this and getting taken into it. Now happiness and misery take the form of action. The end at which the dramatist aims is a certain kind of activity, not a quality.
Can you put that in your own words?
Well, I think what he's saying is the objective thing here is the process out here.
The process in the audience?
No, the play's the thing. No, it's the play. And that's why it can be done over and over like a religious ritual. And people come back to it, and each time they're edified by it, or deepen their understanding of it, or see their life in a different way depending what stage they're at, and all that kind of thing. I think that's what he means. That activity is a universal activity that touches you throughout life, but you don't understand the universality of it.
Right.
So if the tragic flaw, we saw that in there, even though he never uses that word. But it's obvious to me that he talks about a tragic flaw. And so maybe he's encouraging us to understand the humanness of people through their suffering and their sorrow, and you can have a better understanding and empathy through it.
Except for women and slaves.
Well, yeah, they're lower forms of life.
They're not as important
For those who haven't seen this, we need to explain.
Yeah, by the way, Joe, that wasn't Joe's idea. That's what
Aristotle.
He makes that
Dig 'em up.
observation.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, he calls
So I
them
don't
tragic
get some
flaw
very
defects of
nasty
character.
emails.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And misunderstanding of how to handle fear and pity too.
One, just below that section that you read, Jake,
Yes.
I think two sentences below, it says, consequently, the end, whatever that means, the end of a tragedy is its action.
To be performed. It's a
Its
ritual.
fable or plot, and the end is in all things paramount.
Yes, it's a ritual. Do it over and over. I mean, it's even like the Mass in a certain sense.
The action, sake of the action.
one thing he's saying is that, and we're kind of saying it too, is art, tragedy specifically, but art in general, has to change people. It has to do something to people. It just can't. You just can't go.
Leave them the same and kind of encounter it, and then at the end you're just the same as before.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It has to engage your emotions anyway in your experience. That's what it has to engage you in some way.
What's interesting to me is, and maybe this is, going a little far afield for this point in the discussion, but the plot is paramount, and the end is paramount. The lesson is paramount, and in more recent centuries, you have plotless literature, and just character is most important, and it's interesting to read this from an earlier time.
And you've got anti-heroes now.
Anti-heroes,
Yes.
yeah. Postmodernism.
Yes,
whatever.
all that stuff.
Well, he says character and thought, though, are the next two important things after plot.
After plot.
But they're all together, and then means and manner and spectacle are lesser things.
But
They're
in modern literature with a capital L today, plot is the least important.
Well, for a lot
Sometimes.
of it.
Sometimes.
Yes, right.
Often.
But certainly not for him.
Plot is the
Right.
very soul, as it were,
Right.
of
That's
tragedy.
right.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
Of the action.
It'd be interesting if we had an Aristotle here now and just watch TV or go to the
Yeah,
movies.
exactly. I was thinking the same.
He was busy tonight. We tried.
But
Yeah.
that's the way he was. Yeah, he was
Yeah.
writing
Be
some
happy.
treatise. Or
Yeah,
other.
yeah.
To have his reaction to some of the stuff that we watch.
We could bring Nietzsche in here.
Did you get on the first page here, 227? Did you understand he's talking about melody? He's talking about pleasurable accessories, rhythm and harmony.
Yeah.
What does?
In verse, it needs to roll off the tongue.
Yes.
Iambic pentameter or whatever.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that wasn't. Greek tragedy didn't.
The chorus.
Was it declaimed in a meterless way? I doubt it.
The chorus
I
certainly
thought he meant
usually wasn't.
specifically song.
It could be song too. It could be chanted, but
Yeah.
it
But
wouldn't
that
have
was-
to be.
Yeah, no, there's no song per se. I think.
But
in
there's
Greek
like a
tragedies, isn't
speaking
there?
choir, like the chorus in some of the, like.
Yeah, but usually they speak it. I don't know how.
I
it's
know
done.
it.
Well,
but
we've
they're
only heard it in
singing
English,
They're doing
too,
it in unison.
Right, that's right.
They're doing it in unison like a speaking
Right,
choir.
right,
And so it really is
Well,
melodic.
Or at least
I know when
melodious.
I don't know where this. I know that when opera was invented, part of the idea was that they were trying to reclaim what they thought were the emotion-producing parts of Greek tragedy, and that's where they came up with the idea of recitative, which is sort of a sung speech.
Yeah.
So maybe that's
Maybe.
maybe.
Yeah, we've never seen how it was done originally. We've never
Right.
heard how the chorus was actually
Right.
done. So yeah, it could be. Yeah. As you read this, what else did you get out of it besides what we're talking about?
Well, one of the things I got out of it, and I was a little surprised, but maybe it's in other parts. I mean, this is just a selection from this, obviously, but I always got the sense that Aristotle was actually, and he's making prescriptions about what an excellent tragedy, how you should structure, how an excellent tragedy is structured. So it's partially descriptive of what he saw on the stage, and
Yeah.
partly prescriptive. But it was much less prescriptive than I thought, because do you guys
He's
remember?
analyzing plays.
Yeah, do you guys remember? I mean, the whole idea of the unities of time, place, I didn't see that here. Did anybody see? It has to be 24 hours. Has to occur in 24 hours. Has to be in the same
Well,
location. I
Has
didn't
to
see
be
any
a
of that in here.
denouement, some point in there where it suddenly twists.
Right. Yeah, there's a reversal.
He does say
Peripeties.
Peripeties.
it has to be
reversals.
one action, he says, though.
But that's a little different than something in the middle that
Oh, yeah.
something comes up and changes
And
something.
just changes it.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think
yeah,
he's
not
contrasting
those
this
things.
from older styles. I mean, he mentions the new comedy and the old comedy, but he also talks about banning things that are not possible. God's coming down from the sky and changing something radically. and that it must be more from life and more like lifelike people.
Right.
So he,
That something follows likely or necessarily
Yeah.
from a person's character
Right.
and from the actions that they
I think
had
the fact
before.
that he's saying this is not that he's seeing this, but he's contrasting it to what's come before. He's saying that modern literature is now like this, and so we have none of that old stuff anymore.
Could be.
Yeah.
Well, he's concerned about the structure of the process too.
Sure.
And you know, if you have gods jumping in there all the time, then there's no necessity or probability to it. And he's trying to explain the structure and the dynamic of this process so you can experience it and control it or make decisions in relation to it.
Why read this? I mean, why is it just? I'll ask. I think I asked it earlier. Is it just about Greek tragedy and what he's saying, or is there applicability now about both our lives and what we see on the screen?
I did take it. I didn't. Yeah. Well, yes and no, I guess. How do you like that for a definite answer? Yes and no. Some of the things some of the ways that he analyzed what goes into. I mean, the six components and what makes a good and a bad instance of those components. I actually sort of thought more about what we saw and thought that some of the things that horror movies, for example, that was actually my thought, and he would say that that's the inferior form of tragedy because it relies on spectacle. It doesn't rely on necessity of character and all that kind of stuff. So it made me think. It sort of illuminated some of the things about our current tragedies. But I didn't think that it. How should I put this? That it really made me think of anything beyond that, and somebody changes, as you were saying. There's some a twist or something like
Yeah.
that. But somebody in the play goes from good to bad. From
Whatever,
good to
happiness
bad.
is an action.
We're running
and
out of
success is
time.
an action.
Recommend it. Up, down, up.
Oh, we'll let him live.
I love it.
Well, the fourth or fifth time I've read it, you get something every
Right,
time.
yeah, right.
It says
Yeah,
the play's
so-
the thing is what it
The
says.
The play's the
yeah,
thing.
Yeah. So
You should copyright that. I like that.
I
Yeah,
should.
that's got a future, I think.
There was
I
a
think
guy,
that's or maybe even a past.
time machine
Okay.
that I
Yeah.
did that too.
So thank you all. Until next time. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. Join us next time as we discuss another important selection. As Aristotle said, the best way to learn is to get together in small groups and discuss great ideas.